Hello and welcome to Personable, a podcast focused on speaking to the world's best, enabling you to become the best that you can be. My name is HarveyBracken-Smith, and today I'm honoured to be joined by Meg Faure. Meg is an occupational therapist, author, speaker, entrepreneur with a passion for the care, development and education of babies and young children. For over 2 decades, she has worked at the intersection of neuroscience, early childhood development and parental mental health, making research practical and accessible for patients. She's the co-author of more than 8 best-selling parenting books, including Baby Sense and Weaning Sense, which have guided hundreds of thousands of families worldwide. Her work as a clinician, writer, and presenter is united by one mission: to empower parents in the critical first 1,000 days of life. As a serial entrepreneur, she's founded and led several businesses that translate this passion into scalable impact. Baby Sense, which was founded in 2005 and sold in 2014, a product company built around infant care solutions. Play Sense, founded in 2016, and we'll see what happens in this year, which is an innovative early years education program for 2 to 4 year olds, blending play-based learning with teacher training and digital curriculum delivery. Sense IT, which was founded in 2020 and built to scale as a B2B business in the health tech space, is a woman-led digital health and education company focused on maternal mental health and parenting support. And she is also the founder and CEO of ParentSense, which is a native mobile application with an app focused on empowering parents as they nurture babies. Usually my introductions for guests are pretty small, but Meg has done so much that I had to include all of that as the introduction for the podcast. Meg, I'm incredibly excited to speak to you today. I wanted to get started by asking you, what was your dream growing up? And how did you get involved in this whole area around infants and parents?
From the youngest age, all I can remember is playing nurse and pretending that I was looking after babies. Like, that was just all I ever wanted to do. So right from the get-go, it was all around children. And in fact, when I went to university and studied occupational therapy, I never did any clinical blocks that actually didn't include babies, children, and the care of their parents. And so in some ways, I guess it was a calling and a very deep passion for me to impact early childhood, because the one thing we do know about life is that your start in life, the way that you parented, the environment that you grow up in, has the most impact for the rest of your life. And that's kind of the space I've always wanted to play in.
How did that evolve from initially getting interested in that within university to what you've done now? Because it's just one thing to be interested in the parenting space, but it's a whole nother thing to write 8 best-selling books and develop more than 4 companies.
Yeah, so I guess, for me, the passion and the impact has always been in the space of early parenting and early childhood. But I have a very, very curious brain. And so very early on in my career, graduated from UCT in Cape Town, University of Cape Town. My first job was in New York City, and it was also in a pediatric facility. And while I was living in New York and in America, I furthered my education a lot and did a lot of specialization courses around sensory integration, neurodevelopmental techniques, infant mental health. And so this curious mind of mine around the science of parenting and the science of brain development and the science of the way in which the human brain develops and how relationships impact life really became my speciality in terms of science. And later on, what happened was that I started to realize that I had a gift for communication. So, there's a difference between what your passions are, what your skills are, and then what your gifts are. And my gift was around communication. And so my ability to communicate then meant that I went on and developed the books. Obviously, my first book I actually wrote in 2001. And I wrote that book on the back of having had my second child. So I had my first 2 kids really young, early in my 20s, and very quickly realized that there was a lot of the science that I had relied on that I then wanted to communicate across to parents, because other parents didn't know about it. So I wrote my first book, which was called Baby Sense. And I can remember very clearly, and anybody who's written a book has probably gone through this, that I said to my husband, I think it's going to be a flop. So you've got to go into every single bookshop and buy every single copy that you can find, because I don't want to be embarrassed by the fact that, we've got to pulp all these books. And then there was a little bit of luck, and that's how life transpires. I ended up on a talk show on a national radio station in South Africa, and the person who was supposed to interview me was sick that day. And the person that stepped in for her was probably one of South Africa's foremost radio kind of talk show hosts of the time. Her name was Gay Davis. And because of the impact that she had in people's lives, the book became an overnight bestseller. Obviously the book was also potentially a good book. But it literally sold out within a couple of weeks.
Of course it was a good book.
Then...
Of course it was a good book. So you don't say it, you don't go potentially a good book for your own book.
Yeah, no, it was, and it was a book that changed parenting in South Africa. This is, kind of in the early 2000s, and it really did change the way that parents parented books to this day. It remains a bestseller. It's one of the biggest parenting books in South Africa. It then went global. It was distributed then by Dorling Kindersley at some point, and so on. So, I think there was a little bit of lack in what I did, but it was all around conveying this information, this absolute science, in a very accessible manner.
Could you take me back to that feeling of when you went on that talk show? Suddenly, it's one of the biggest talk show hosts in the whole of South Africa. And then suddenly you go from your husband having to buy your books or saying he would buy your books to suddenly the next day it's being, it's gone off all the shelves. What was that feeling like, from that point on the show to the next day when all the books are actually your dreams coming true?
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible feeling. I think for me, it was always around the impact. So when I knew that parents' lives were being changed, it was very gratifying. What I did do, which was, and there were some things in my journey that I structured very carefully. One of the things that I did was, right at the beginning of that journey, I started what were called baby sense seminars, which were annual events held across South Africa where parents would be able to come and listen to the top scientists in early parenting alongside me. And I can remember looking out at those crowds, because we literally touched thousands of parents every year, and realizing, wow, this is impact, So I don't think I ever stopped and went, this is going to be amazing for my career. I wasn't really framing it in that way. It was more around, wow, look at this impact. These are how many lives we're touching. And yeah, so there was an element of surprise for sure. And then obviously a feeling of, wow, this is impactful. This is how we reach people properly.
Similarly to you, I like to describe myself as quite a curious person. Like when I find something from a surface level point of view, even if I'm hearing a lot of opinions, I want to go deeper on it myself. And it seems like quite an obvious question to ask, but I'm the eldest of 4 kids, so I'm 21, and my youngest sister is only 11 years old. So I remember when my mum was pregnant with my younger sister, I was around 9 or 10 years old, so I was pretty, cognizant of what was going on. And I can remember my mum, even after having 3 kids already, reading book after book after book after book on the detail of pregnancy, of trying to maximize the best thing she could for her younger kids. Even though I hope she would think that we turned out pretty okay, she was still doing as much reading and as much research as she could. But a pretty obvious thing is that both you and I, we have our own parents, and our parents have parents, and our parents have parents, and their parents had parents. Why do you think there is so much demand for parents having kids for the first time? Why do you think they seek out so much information over something that's been done so many times before by everyone we know on the entire planet?
Yeah, look, I think the reason why I'm so passionate about what I do with parents is because what I experienced, and it would have been your mom's experience when she had you as well, when you have your first child, you are utterly lost. You know that what has been delivered into your hands in that labor ward is the most precious thing you've ever touched. And you're also terrified about how you're going to break it, because you actually are never prepared to be a parent. And that goes for parenting baby 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so every time you never gain the confidence to say, wow, I've really got this sorted, because every baby's different. And I think it's by nature science tells us that certain things happen in a mother's brain when she's pregnant, that there are certain areas of the brain that actually shift completely and end up with a very deep focus on just that human life. And so you have questions around, what do they need? How do I get them to survive? How do I do the best for them? And so in these millions of questions that have been age old all the way through all the generations, we seek information. Now, 200 years ago, and before, that information was conveyed around a fire or in a tent with other women. And so you watched your sisters breastfeed, you watched your mother breastfeed other children. There was just such a, generations merged, so you could have been 21 and your mother could still be having children back in those days. People were just having babies very young and so on. So there was this real community in which information was conveyed from one generation to the next. And we have lost that. The modern world has removed that from us. We grow up in nuclear families. where women don't see other women breastfeed. They don't have information conveyed by their mother necessarily. And so there's this like deep thirst and this curiosity, I love the word curiosity, for how on earth do I help this human life to not just survive, but actually thrive. And so on the back of that, in the kind of late 1900s and early 2000s, people were reading a huge amount of books. Then with the advent of internet, obviously, we shifted our attention to websites. And then more recently than that, social media and influencers. And now, of course, in the last 2 years, ChatGPT and our large language models are supplying that information. And so there's this deep curiosity and this need for information that parents have. And that's, I think, the pain point that I address in all of the different products and books and businesses that I've built, is that quest for information and that curiosity inside mothers' minds.
But how do parents go about finding information that they can trust? Because something that I've found in the limited research that I've done on parenthood, just out of curiosity, is there's very much a case of like, early babies are getting autism from vaccines, or, vaccines are the most important thing you can have for a baby, or a baby needs to be left outside. Like you hear about these stories in colder countries where babies are left outside wrapped up because it makes them be able to fight off diseases at a younger age. Or you have other parents who don't want their kids to go outside at all, so they don't get exposure to anything, but then they might be impacted by diseases later on. Every kid might need to get chickenpox at a younger age, or maybe kids don't need chickenpox at all. How do kids, it's very obvious coming from you, if parents to be able to get, some exposure to you or to the work that you've done, to be able to go, okay, she's an expert, I'm going to listen to what she says, I'm going to think about it critically, and then I'm going to think about whether I integrate this into my life or not. But for people that, don't have access to the internet, or people that aren't as educated or have access to, the right people online, how do you focus from a societal level and from a global perspective? How should we be better educating both mothers and fathers to be better educated about what's right for their kids, particularly in this age of social media, where both information on the left and right that isn't necessarily fact-checked or verified is being put out by anyone and everyone and not just experts?
Yeah, I mean, you've literally touched on the thing that keeps me awake at night, because there is an enormous amount of information. So you've got the searching parent feeling vulnerable. You've got an enormous amount of information, and most of it is uncurated. So Dr. Google is generally, you can find some curated information on there, but the problem is it's not specified to your baby. Influencers with very loud voices, unfortunately, are very, very rarely grounded in science. And so usually it's an anecdotal report of something that did or didn't work for them, or some sort of wisdom that they feel has been passed down. And some of that wisdom is really, really dangerous. I mean, the vaccine debate is a very good example of that, where it's a very polarized topic amongst parents. And you get, I suppose just like the vaccine, the COVID vaccine was, you get very, very loud voices on either side. And if you're a new mom, how do you actually filter that? And so for me, I have only ever aligned myself with experts who are medically trained. So in all of the books I've written, I've always had a co-author or two, depending on the nature of the topic. And all of those co-authors have been medical professionals. And then in my latest project, my business called ParentSense, which is a parenting application, we have about 50 courses on the app that parents can go and watch. But every single one of those is delivered by a medical professional who's with a registered medical body. And so I don't go for the fringe information. I don't go for the information that isn't grounded in science. And I think in some ways I've always acted as a filter for moms, for them to understand that actually this is a voice you can trust, because I'll go and do the research for them. I'll go and check, the idea of leaving babies out in the cold, or get babies getting sunlight versus not having their skin exposed to sun. I mean, all of these debates, I'll go and look it up, I'll read up about it, and I'll make sure that the information parents get is curated. And I think in many respects, certainly in South Africa, I am probably the most trusted parenting voice. But in most countries, there will be a parenting voice that hopefully curates information for parents, and then, parents follow that. But it's a real minefield, because there's just so much conflicting information.
I definitely want to go down into the specific details and the weeds for first-time mothers, for parents in this podcast. But something I want to ask you now, for someone that's never been exposed to you before, that is either a first-time mother, first-time father, or is expecting to have a child in the future. if you could give them one message now in, say, like the next minute on the fundamentals of parenthood, if this is the only exposure to you that they were ever going to get, what fundamentals or key things would you say to that expecting father or mother before they have their first child?
Well, the first thing is that you won't have all the answers, and you need to be comfortable in the grey. And we talk a lot about being comfortable in the grey, because I think a lot of life is black and white, and we've got a rule book, and parenting is the one place where that actually doesn't exist. So you need to be comfortable existing in the grey. In that grey, there would be two things that you would want to do. The first is you would want to find one sensible voice to listen to. And, I think this is important, because if you go out onto TikTok or wherever it is, and you start to look at every piece of parenting information, they will be conflicting, and it'll make you more grey. So try to find a voice that you really do trust, so that you're a little less in the grey. You will be in the grey, but find a trusted voice. And then the second piece of that fits with that is to become comfortable with understanding your own gut feeling. And, I think a lot of what happens when science is thrown at you and when there's the noise of the internet and social media is that you lose your own gut sense. And actually every parent has that gut sense inside of them. So when you're listening to that expert, or when you have scrolled through those reels and something doesn't resonate or feels weird inside of you, listen to that voice. Because inside of us, we do actually have the answers. So, be comfortable in the grey, choose voices that you really can trust, and then listen to your own inner voice. And when you put that package together, you will be okay in parenting. You will feel better, and you'll start to find your way.
And then, so thank you very much for that very helpful message. Hopefully I'm not going to be expecting a child anytime soon, but I'm sure that's very helpful for parents with their first child, and even with any children coming forward. Could we go into purposefully a broad strokes question? Could you tell me some of the scientific fundamental things of parenthood, kind of building on that initial block of what you just said, of where we should be looking next as a parent, what sort of books we should be reading, how the evolution of parenthood, evolves over time from a newborn to 6 months, 12 months, etc. Because it's obviously both a continual learning process with adapting to the child that you have, but also by looking and speaking to friends, speaking to family, speaking to your own mum and dad, but also looking for external sources such as through your own books, websites, social media, etc.
So when I think about parenting and I think about that foundation and things that parents really need to know, over the years, because of my curiosity, my own science has evolved, in that I focused on different aspects of early childhood. But for me, there are three fundamental things that parents need to know as they embark on this journey. The first is that the most important thing, the number one thing that you give a child, is not whether or not they breastfeed, not whether or not they're vaccinated. It is actually emotional connection. So for every adult who is connecting with other adults, holding down relationships, succeeding in the business world, whatever it is, there will have been a foundational relationship early on in their life that kind of codes for connection. And so the most important thing you can do for your child is actually emotionally connect. And emotional connection is recognizing their feelings, helping them to self-regulate their emotions, letting them find their voice and having an identity where they can shout and scream and be angry, and that's all okay, really giving people their voice, and then giving them a platform from which they will then go and catapult. And Harvey, just based on what I've seen of you and listened to on your podcast, that's something that must have been baked into your early childhood because of the way that you approach other people and the way your curious mind around connecting with other people. So connection is probably one of the most important things we can give our children. And that's number one. The second one is very, very new science. This is new science that has only come out in maybe the last 10 years, and that's all around the gut microbiome. And, there's a lot of talk around the gut microbiome. You just have to listen to Steve Bartlett's show on health, and it'll come up somewhere. And we know that what we feed our gut has a very direct bearing on our mental health as well. So it's not just around whether or not we're going to get diabetes or obesity or, any other chronic disease. It's also around our mental health. And that gut microbiome is seeded from pregnancy through the birth canal into the early years, and it's in what you feed and wean your child onto. So if the conscious parent should be thinking about what their child is being fed. It's very, very important. And then the third piece is all around the sensory. So we are sensory beings. What's very interesting about the human brain is that we have every single brain cell that we need for the rest of our lives on the day that we're born. We don't ever grow a single another neuron. What we do grow is the connections between those neurons. So on the day a baby is born, their brain is just really a bundle of neurons that are unconnected, largely unconnected. Little bits of connections happen in the third trimester. But in the first 3 to 5 years of life, those connections or synapses go wild. And that only happens in the context of sensory experiences. And what really worries me at the moment is that a lot of young children are growing up in a sensory sterile world, because technology, using iPads, watching YouTube videos for young children, and being on tech, on any form of tech for young children, is way too sterile for the developing brain. And I do think that a lot of the neurodiversity that we're now seeing come out as an epidemic in young children, from autism to ADHD to conduct disorders, is actually grounded in what happens in those early sensory experiences. So when I speak to parents around science, those are the 3 pieces that I'm looking at. I'm looking at your emotional connection with your child, what you're feeding your child, and how you're seeding that gut microbiome, and their sensory experiences.
I sort of have 3 different points with regard to, I'll call that emotional connection, love, the gut health, and the sensory experiences. It was nice that you related me back into that first one on emotional connection with my own family, and I actually wrote down 2 things which kind of came to mind. The first of which is I'm actually neurodiverse. I have dyslexia, ADHD, and traits of Asperger's. And these weren't really things that held me back. We were actually connected by a friend of mine, and at school when I was younger with Jess, we were both competing very academically. And I think kids with neurodiversity, there's often, people thought there was a strong correlation between neurodiversity and low IQ, but because my IQ was high and I performed in school, parents and teachers didn't really think there was anything wrong with me. And so it was only when I was 14, I was just diagnosed with dyslexia, and then at 18 with ADHD. And the reason I bring that up is I can vividly remember when I was like 5 or 6 or however old you are when you're learning to spell. And I really struggled with spelling at school, and teachers never noticed, and we'd get given 10 words to spell for a spelling test once a week. And I really struggled, and I would probably spend 3 hours or more doing those words, and no matter how many flashcards I had, no matter how many times I tried, and I really wanted to learn these things. Meanwhile, teachers are calling me lazy, telling me I have bad handwriting, and just like bullying me for basically telling me I'm not doing it when I'm trying my hardest. And I really thought I was stupid, and I don't think, which I'll explain what the solution was, I think that if I'd continued that path, there'd be no way that I'd gone to Eton, gone to Duke, have a podcast like this, be going to Goldman Sachs and everything else that I'm doing. And it was actually through my mum who told me, she didn't realise, maybe she probably noticed that I was struggling, but she basically took it away from IQ and EQ to simply say, Harvey, I'm going to help you with this spelling. What's the word? Spell it out to me. You don't get it. And she just sat with me for hours and hours and hours and hours, helping me spell. And so over time, it was like I had this embarrassment factor from, I can't spell like the kids all next to me, to, oh, my mum loves me and supports me no matter what, if I get 100% on this test or if I get 0. And it was just that strong feedback loop that I had throughout my entire childhood. I'd enter sports games, I'd do a test, I'd run cross country, no matter what I did, I'd ask my mum and dad, Mum, Dad, do you mind, like, if I don't do well, do you still love me? And every time they'd say yes. And over time, because I knew that they still cared about me, even just from an embarrassment point of view, I built on that and did better over time. The second main point on that was, so I went to boarding school, I went to Eton in the UK. I'm obviously from Jersey, where you're based at the moment, Channel Islands, little island near France. And I went to boarding school, and that was the best thing for me at the time. It has enabled me to, keep pushing and myself academically and every other aspect of my life. And no matter what, even while I was in the UK, my parents would fly over and watch me play sports every single week. I know this might be a barrier for people financially, but for my parents, it was more so a point of them coming over and seeing me every single time that they could. I would FaceTime them every single day. I still speak to my parents every single day on the phone, and my siblings. So that's the first one, and I can definitely see the importance of love. The second one, gut health, is something that I want to research a lot more myself. I feel like gut health is such an underexplored topic, with both like the foods that we put in and the information we get around it, because it's often been told, like eat your vegetables, get your protein in, etc. But even myself, I train pretty hard in the gym, and I still only get about 2/3 the amount of protein that I should be consuming for the amount of rugby and sport that I'm playing. And like particularly for an early young body, this is particularly important. And the third one with sensory experiences and screens. Myself, similarly, I'm someone that likes to go I'd say I'm extroverted, but I like time to myself in my own room at the end of the day. And so my inclination when I'd be tired would have been to go to my room. But when I was, I'm 21 now, when I was younger and I'd be in my room, there wasn't a case of, a screen to go on or something to keep me constantly entertained. I'd have to draw or think of an idea for a few hours, but eventually I'd get bored. And so I would go outside, I'd play rugby in the garden with my siblings, and that not only increased my coordination, but also my sociability, my creativity, my willingness to get outside. Mm-hmm. But my younger sister, who I mentioned earlier in the podcast, is only 11, definitely got better with going outside, and she's very coordinated, perhaps better than me at table tennis and tennis, but we'll see about that. But her inclination is to go on screens. And you can see these things with young impressionable minds of they're exercising less, they're spending more time indoors, they're putting on more weight because of the access of bad foods around them, they're socializing less, and they're learning from these extreme, unverified, unfact-checked, extreme, unfiltered figures online. And so, I know that was quite a long tangent with those three, but I wanted to relate that back to myself because I thought all three of those were pretty impactful.
Yeah, and they're very important. You know what I love about the first one you spoke about was the goodness of fit between you and your environment. And I think, when we talk about people who have neurodiversity, and I'm surrounded by them in my family as well, and I think a lot of people now have some form of diagnosis or neurodiversity. But when there's a good match with your environment, you will just excel. And, it doesn't have to hold you back. And I think what often happens is that there's this mismatch with your environment. An example of which is you're stupid. You can't do your maths or your spelling. You're inadequate. Somebody who doesn't spend time with you or just, gives you a computer to go on because they just can't be bothered to do the spelling with you like your mum did. And, I think you really highlight that goodness of fit, which is, it's central. And it's really and as a parent, I think when you do have a child who's neurodiverse, you should be looking for opportunities to make the environment fit what their brain profile is. Because when you do that, they can excel and then they feel successful, which you have clearly you've always felt successful, even when it was a little bit of a battle to get there.
Yeah, I definitely think that point of effort versus right and wrong is very important. Like I've seen multiple studies over time that when you get a group of kids and you tell them they've got it right or they've got it wrong, their level of effort is drastically decreased and their performance over time versus telling kids that they put in a lot of effort. Because I think it's that whole notion that effort isn't reliant on results. You can focus on the input, but you can't control the output. And so if you do everything you can to put in the most effort, over time, you're going to be much more successful. And linking back to that neurodiversity point real quick, with my younger brother, Freddie, who's also got ADHD and dyslexia, I remember when there'd be certain situations when, I'd say I can't focus or, I'm not working as hard. And my excuse was to say, oh, it's my ADHD. And he'd probably use very colorful language at me. And he'd say, Harvey, that's no excuse whatsoever. Because on the one hand, maybe there are things that you can't control. But in pretty much every single situation on the planet, there are things that you can control. And I think it's the exact same things for kids. It's not the place of a teacher, a parent, a friend to say, you're not good enough, you're stupid, you can't improve, because that keeps people in a fixed state of mind. It's for people to say, okay, you struggle with that. Maybe let's look at this from another point of view. Let's put in more effort here and let's see what happens. And I'm a true believer that it's those that put in more effort, have confidence despite receiving bad results and just put in work consistently that will achieve results over time.
Yes, and it's such an interesting thing that you bring up because it speaks to my life as an entrepreneur as well. And that is that in order to do that, you've got to be prepared to fail. And, I think failure is one of the most important aspects of human development, actually failing, getting yourself back up again and going back out and try. Now, if your experience had been that you failed, that therefore your parents didn't love you, that therefore you were isolated, that you'd lost the recognition in the family, you'd stop trying again. You definitely would have, because at some point you would have lost the confidence to keep trying. I think you bring up such an important point, that one of the most important things that parents do for their children is to give them the space to fail. Because what happens when you are allowed to fail and then gather yourself back up again, you then actually start to learn from your mistakes, and then you can iterate. In my business, pivot. I'm in a tech startup, so we've had to do a pivot along the way. But that pivot only happened because I'm not scared of failure. I'm really excited to go and try something. Sometimes it works, and then we double down on it, and sometimes it doesn't. And it's that, and that's, when I think about really successful people, I think, and it kind of ties back to childhood. It's that ability to fail without fear, and to then get yourself back up again, to have that grit, to have that resilience, and then go and try something new, or to actually iterate and pivot and move on.
Kind of linking to that point, because that kind of links to my own childhood versus thinking that intelligence was fixed, to realizing that actually the work I can put in has a big impact on how, I might have a fixed level of intelligence, but there's a big scale towards how I perform relative to that. Could you talk to me a little bit about the idea of nature versus nurture? I think a lot of people socioeconomically think that they're fixed in a position due to external factors such as, their race, their gender, where they were born in the world, things that they've done. And so they think that these might be passed on to their kids as well, leaving them sort of in a fixed state of mind. Could you talk a little about what parents can do, and whether there are things that parents can do, before a baby is born, during pregnancy, and after a baby has been born, to enable them to be as intelligent as possible, to have the best EQ they can, to work hard, to do things? Like, are these just innate things that the best, smartest, and most successful people on the planet have, or are these actual traits that can be passed on from any parent onto their kids?
So it's a very interesting debate. So first of all, the nurture-nature debate has been, going around for probably more than 100 years now. And for a very long period of time, in the early 1900s, there was a big body of knowledge that felt, or science that felt, that it was all around the genes. So what you were given on the day you were born was pretty much going to be your outcome. And so if whatever it was, whether your skin color, your IQ, whatever it was, that was you. That was kind of what you were capped out on the day you were born. What we now know is, of course, that is not true. And in fact, while nature is important, nurture has by far the bigger impact. And so the way that you're nurtured and the things that you're told from a young age are things that really manifest and create your outcome long term. So you can be a child in a very depraved, highly risky kind of environment. And there is the word ACEs are adverse childhood events. And the number of adverse childhood events that you have as you're growing up really does create a level of risk. And this is, there's a lot of science around this. And the biggest compounding factor in terms of ACEs, so an example of an ACE would be trauma, like violence. Seeing violence would be an ACE. It would be one of the adverse childhood events. But the biggest compounding ACE is actually poverty. And so children that come from very impoverished environments are more likely to see violence, are less likely to have good nutrition, and therefore, what happens to them longer term really is usually their outcome is negative. In fact, by the time you got to kindergarten or sub-A or grade 1 or whatever you call it in your country, by the time you got there, you have probably been set up for life or not set up for life. So a lot of what happens in those first 5 years from your genes, but more importantly, your early childhood environment has this massive impact. And it's, if you see your mother abused every day, or if you're told you're stupid every day, or if you never have a full meal every day, these type of things really do set you up for a lifetime of adversity, both health-wise and also emotionally. Having said that, there are things incredible parents do even in very impoverished situations. And there is an enormous list of incredible influencers, podcast hosts, people in business who have come from very, very adverse environments and have overcome it. What probably would have happened for them, though, is there would have been a protective factor, and that protective factor is usually a relationship. And so one of the things that we talk about is the ability to self-regulate your emotions. That only happens in the context of relationships. So an in-tune mum or dad helps little ones to regulate their emotions. And if you are able to regulate your emotions as a 2 to 3 to 5-year-old, you're more likely to be successful through life. And I'm sure that you would have actually heard of the research of the marshmallow research that came out of, I think it was out of Stanford University, where a child was given a marshmallow, told if they waited 15 minutes, they would get a second one. And the children who could delay gratification and self-regulate their behavior in every single measure of success, from their marriage to the number of papers they publish as an academic, to their salary level, to drug addiction, to obesity, those children did better. Now, kids who have developed self-regulation early on, whether they've come from very impoverished environments or very privileged environments, only have developed that self-regulation in the context of a caring and loving relationship. And so, taking this back to your question, yes, the environment, the genes will have an impact. Yes, the environment will have an impact, but both of those will be protected and will not have a negative impact if you've got a parent who is really in tune. And that's why the work that I do is the most important, because you're setting children up for success or deviation long-term in life just through a relationship.
Thank you for that incredible level of detail, both in terms of showing me the ACE cards and the protective factors. Linking to that idea, I saw something interesting the other day in which it said that people aren't confident. If you just pretend to be confident for a long enough piece of time, you then are confident. So it's more an account of the actions that you do as what you become. And so I can see the exact same thing for younger kids, that if they're being told by their parents, you're not smart enough on a pretty much daily basis, that then informs their psyche and makes them, which gets their conscience and makes them believe that they are actually not smart. And so I can definitely see the massive impact. But say they have these ACE cards, right? There's these young kids, 0 to 5. I don't think I was really conscious that much until 9 or 10, right? So they literally have no control over what they do, and they've got an abusive parent or they're in poverty. There is almost a thing to say that if the environment is more important than the genes within their body, if a child has been in an abusive state or in an impoverished state up to the age of 9, there's almost a thing for us to just say, they're screwed, right? They've been put in a poverty-based background. The past 9 years have been horrific. Even though they may have another 80% of their life left, they've been screwed. But I think to an extent that takes the ownership and level of choice out of people's lives as they get older. So you mentioned that the outliers have a protective factor, in that usually being a relationship with someone. Let's say you've got a kid from an impoverished background and now they're around 16 years old. So they've been more conscious for a couple of years. They know they've had an awful childhood. They know that there's other kids ahead of them, both financially, emotionally, care-wise. They've been given so many better resources, and they don't have a protective factor, but they still want to be successful. They still want to learn. They want to go to school, get a good job, have a great family, stay in a marriage for a long piece of time, and all the other things have been thrown out the window. Looking at the outliers, what are some bits of hope or things that these kids can now focus on, where they go from being cared for or not cared for by their parent to becoming their own individual? What can these kids do to give themselves a better chance or a second chance at life?
Yeah, it's such a great question, because the reality is that even if you've had a very high level of ACEs and you never had that primary relationship, there are definitely people that succeed in spite of where they've come from. And there's actually some research that shows that there is in fact a gene that codes for that, for people who are deeply resilient and are able to overcome absolutely every adversity and still fly. So there is a genetic component to that. But there are certainly things that you can do. And I think, for me, a couple of things. For those, if I'm speaking to those people who are listening today, the first thing is be curious about what has made other people succeed, and go out and listen to, like, a podcast like this is just golden, because you're going to get nuggets of wisdom from people who have been there and have done things, like whether it is a 5 a.m. club, or whether it is a certain fitness regime, or whether it is, going out and giving time elsewhere and, being philanthropic. All of these little tips will actually shift your life. So the first thing is model yourself, be curious, and think about the way that other people have done it. I would definitely think about that. Put disciplines in your life. I think that's one of the things when things are really hard and, and you're moving against inertia. and, to try and get yourself going, put disciplines in. And I have to do that with my life, where every day there's a certain sequence I do in the morning because I don't feel like it, but I know that it'll set me up to win the day. It's my slay the day moments where I do my exercise, do my meditation, spend the time just planning my day. And I do that every single morning. And I think that's a discipline that if you can get that right, and you've come from an impoverished background, you've had all the aces, if you start to do disciplines like that, it will make a difference. And then, I think the two things in terms of your characteristics in life, one is be curious, always be learning. I always say to my kids, try not to be the most intelligent person in a room. Try and always know that there's somebody that you can learn from. And the other one is never fear failure. And, I think that, when you come from a background where you have maybe been, not been built up, you haven't had this incredible childhood, you need to have it deep within yourself to know that I'm okay, even if I fail, and I'll get up again and I'll try again, because that will make the difference.
I want to ask you for shorter answer questions, just in terms of timekeeping, and then I also want to ask you a little about your company and then some broader questions to close off. I know you said parenting is a grey area, there is no black and white, but there've got to be a few things, right? Could you just name off a few things that are a good thing to do as a parent and some things that are bad? Despite, you can ignore the obvious ones, be nice to your kids, be loving, but there's some key principles that all parents should do that are good, and principles that are bad, which you think a listener would be able to find value out of.
So in my app, we have the 4 areas of childhood, which is sleep, feeding, health, and play. And so I'm going to give you one for each of those. So let's start with sleep. Sleep is the way that the brain develops. It's the way we make connections. It is incredibly important. It's the way we flush out toxins. A bedtime routine, number one. So if I have to give one tip just on sleep, get into a really good bedtime routine and don't make it too late, because we know that a good bedtime routine will set children up for good sleep at night. If they're sleeping well at night, their brain is growing. In terms of feeding, breastfeeding is very important. It really is. The nutritional compounds in breast milk are very difficult to replicate perfectly in formula milk. But if you do choose to formula feed, be okay with it, because there's not enough space for guilt in our minds. So that would be on the feed side. On the development side, and this potentially would be my most important one of the 4, limit screens. I mean, screens, there will come a time, Harvey, there will, in my lifetime, where screens are found to be as toxic as nicotine and cigarette smoke for babies under 2 years of age.
Now, we can call that today.
Yeah. We know it, and the science is coming out absolutely definitively. No tech, no screens for children under 2 years of age. And then if I have to look at the 4th domain, which is health, do vaccinate your children. There is absolutely no debate. Any so-called science around vaccinations causing autism is flawed. Categorically, it is flawed. I've looked at the science. And vaccination is, although we don't realize it because we live in a world where diseases have been eradicated to a large extent, but it is the most life-saving medical invention of all time, of vaccinations, and we just don't see it anymore. We don't see people walking around with polio legs. We don't see people with the aftermath of blindness from measles. We don't see these things. And so we don't think vaccinations are important, but they really are. So those were 4 just quick nuggets on each of the domains of parenting.
Well, on that screen point, I saw a news article the other day which was actually shut down. So Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, now known as Meta, was homeschooling his kid along with 15 other billionaire kids. And actually it was a no-screen school. So if you've got the actual creators of social media telling their kids not to use screens, you can understand why it's so important. I personally think screens are so important not to have, because it wastes your time. It gets you just inputting so much information that overwhelms your mind, but it also takes away the ability for critical thought and reasoning, which is actually what makes humans human. So if you have no receptor to say, this is a piece of information, do I think it's right, wrong, do I want to commit it to memory or not? If you have no way of doing that, and you're just simply just constantly inputting stuff, you're taking away what it makes to be human. I mentioned 3 other points I wanted to quickly ask. I was reading an article about your books, and one of them, so I'll just say one of them at a time, but one was basically on about depression after pregnancy. So saying that more than 1 in 5 pregnant women will experience depression or anxiety. Pregnancy and early womanhood motherhood are peak times for the onset of mental health struggles, and the consequences ripple far beyond the mother, impacting babies' development, relationships, and whole families. Please could you talk a little bit about that? Because, I personally didn't know as much about that. And then both as a mother that may be going through a depressive case, what they can do, and for the people around them, what they can do to help a mother who is going through a depressive phase.
Yeah, I mean, it is a horrific stat. I mean, it's something like 25 to 30% of women will go through some type of depressive episode or anxiety period during the perinatal period. And it very often starts in pregnancy and then goes through on into the first year of life. And actually, one of the things that we do, I work a lot with medical aid schemes or medical insurance schemes. We actually do early screening for this because we know if we catch it early, it can be super preventative. It's actually devastating because about 10% of those women will actually either harm themselves or their baby because they cannot see the way out of it. So it is really a
high number.
Critical public health issue. Yeah, 10% of the women who've got depression, obviously not of all women, but it's very high. And I have personally known women who have committed suicide and postnatally, and so it is actually devastating. And as a community, we need to group together to support these women. It has a little bit to do with what happens hormonally for us, but it has a lot to do with the weight of responsibility and the anxiety that I spoke about right at the beginning of our chat, where I'm lost, I don't know what to do, and I've got this massive responsibility of this human life. So this is where it comes from. If I am a woman who is listening to this and my interest is piqued around this particular subject, and you are feeling like you're not getting joy from your baby, you can't see your way through to tomorrow, the world looks like a little bit of a black tunnel, which I had experienced with my firstborn just for a couple of days. Those are very real feelings, and you have to reach out. If you are somebody on the outside, so you're a partner or a friend,
who should you reach out to?
Yeah, so look, there are lots of amazing organizations, postnatal depression and perinatal anxiety organizations globally. I would definitely be reaching out to some sort of counselor, somebody who's outside of your social circle, because there's a lot of shame, which shouldn't be there, that comes along with this. A friend of mine wrote the most amazing book called When Blessings Don't Count. And it was all about perinatal depression. And what she was saying was that at this moment in your life, when you've got this beautiful, healthy, amazing baby, everyone says to you, count your blessings. But actually, when you have perinatal depression and anxiety, your blessings don't count because you're feeling so low. So if you're feeling like that and you've got that shame, you do need to reach out to somebody. And if you know someone, if you're the partner and your wife is very irritable or going through very specific routines like checking on the baby 59 times at night, or there's so many of these indicators. She's not the person she was before, and she's very irritable with you. Those are all flags that you might not think she's got depression. You might just think she's irritable, but actually these are red flags that say she needs to be taken care of.
My second question, I just jotted these three down because as someone that's not a parent, these are kind of things I notice with parents around me at school. But the second one is, how should parents find purpose after their kids leave the house?
Oh, I love that question. So I'm going through that stage of my life. I have 3 children. My kids have all left home. I have the most incredible purpose. And I think there are a couple of things. One is I never, ever stopped learning and working. And so even if you are a full-time mom and you've chosen that vocation in life, which of course is very important, make sure that you are always feeding your mind, curious about the world, investing in something outside of your children. So that could be a charitable organization. It could be starting up a business. It could be doing a second degree. So make sure that you've got purpose outside of your children. I certainly always had that. I've always run businesses ever since my children were born. I'm an entrepreneur, an author. So that's what I did. So when my kids left home, I love them coming home. I really do. And I cherish my time with them. But I've got real purpose outside of them. And I think purpose outside of your children is very, very important, particularly for women who can get sucked into their whole purpose, their entire purpose, only being their children.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because my mother unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but she was actually a CEO of a business all the way through, until I was 18, pretty much until she got ill. And she would, when she was like, I was around 16, it was sort of when the time she was ill, but even a little bit before that, she got pretty sad sometimes because she felt like she was letting me down as a mum. And she was like, I've got this job, I could be spending more time, with you as a mum. And I did not feel that way for a second. She still came to all these sports games. I chat to her every day. She was the most amazing mum I could ever think of. And I'm not just saying that to say it. And I'm not taking a jab at mums that don't work, but to see both of my parents pursuing careers and pursuing passions that made me go, oh my, these are people that I want to emulate. These are people that I want to be like when I grow up. But seeing that both with mum and dad instead of just with dad, and that doesn't have to be just as a business through the mum. It could be through charitable organizations or other hobbies. But the fact that she did that really inspired me to be a better person. It also meant that the time that I did have with my mum, it felt extra special because usually she'd be at work managing, hundreds of people and an, 8-figure business. And she also did triathlon. So that was definitely something that kept her going. And so I do think there is something very important to be said about, having a business or having another hobby on the side, because your kids won't see that as, oh, I'm avoiding time with my kids. They'll see that as, you realize that you need some time for yourself to go to the gym, spend time with friends, push forward on your own hobbies and passions, because that then in turn inspires your kids to want to emulate you and see, okay, my mum's doing this. What is the right path for me moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, there's science. There's a lot of science around that as well. And research that has shown that children who see their both parents, not just dad, working hard and having a vested interest outside of the home actually do better themselves as well and are more likely to be entrepreneurial, academic, and so on. Something that really stood out for me about your mum, which I think is incredible, is the fact that she apologized to you and that she came to you with, I feel like I failed you. And one of the realities of being a mum, and it is for a dad as well, but it is slightly less so, but certainly one of the realities of being a mom is that juggle is, I'm never doing enough for my business because I'm focused on my children. I'm never doing enough for my children because I'm focused on my business. The fact that she articulated that to you has so much meaning because it allows you to have that same attitude towards your own failures. When you feel like you're dropping balls, to say to somebody, I think I'm dropping balls here and I'm really sorry. 9 times out of 10, they'll look at you and go, gosh, I hadn't even noticed, just like you hadn't noticed with your mum. But she really modeled for you what, when you're failing, acknowledging it and continuing to move through it is just such a key thing. So, she gave you gifts in ways that maybe you didn't really always understand.
Yeah, it's a really lovely way of putting it, and definitely something which I'll think about moving forward, because it's I definitely noticed, without going into too much detail, that people would punish you for something, whether it's a colleague at work or whether it's someone's triathlon or my siblings and even myself included would get annoyed at mum when she's not got enough time. But I think when you're truly compassionate about the things people have going on in their lives, they actually become more efficient because they realize these people around me care about me, they're empathetic towards me, and so therefore I'm going to work harder to go the extra mile. The last of those 3 little questions which I have the 2 words written down: tiger parents. Tiger parents, if you find the kid in your year that's got a tiger parent, I would often associate that as, they're getting too involved. They're going on when their kid hasn't been picked on a sports team, screaming at them, why are they not being involved? When their kid's not top of the class, they're speaking to the teacher, but it's not behind the scenes, it's very much a forefront, which annoys other parents, and annoys teachers, it annoys other kids, and it annoys the kid itself. What is the balance between wanting to do the best for your kid and wanting them to excel versus going too over the board, not letting them make mistakes themselves, not letting them make decisions, and truly get in the way of their life?
Yeah, and that was actually a book that was written quite a few years ago that I was interviewed on. It was on the cover of Times magazine, actually, about the tiger mums. And it is particularly endemic in Asian cultures to a large extent. And that was actually what the book was written about. But I think we do our children no service when we push them too hard and give them no space for respite and play, and I'll come back to that, and when we pick up after them and don't let them fail. And so both these two types of parent, the one is the helicopter parent and the other one is the tiger mum, both of those do their children no favors. Long term in life, there can be no good outcome. So with the tiger mum, what often happens is that the children are overscheduled from a very young age. So they're going from their kind of language lessons to their string instrument lesson to their sports lesson. They're being taught to read at 6 months of
Sounds like
age.
me. It sounds like me when I was younger, I'm not gonna lie.
Well, I can tell you that the science shows us very clearly that free time with absolutely no agenda, which we would call play, is actually the most important thing for young children. And my son, who's a little older than you, owns a business in AI, and it's incredibly successful. And I put it down to the fact that he had long, lazy hours of imaginary play for a very long time when he was very little. So I definitely wasn't a tiger mom. I believed in play. I believed in not overscheduling children. And I think the evidence is overwhelming that we should not be overscheduling our children and rather giving them time for boredom. And, boredom breeds mischief, and mischief is the root of creativity. And that's what you want your little ones to have. You want them to be bored, get up to mischief, because my gosh, you're coding them to be an entrepreneur one day because, you're firing all those creative brain cells. So that's why I am anti-tiger parenting. On the other side, the helicopter parent who never allows their children to fail and cleans up after them and life is cushy for them and, they must just have it their way, that also has absolutely no benefits, because one of the things we know about resilience and grit is that resilience and grit can only develop if you fail and if life is hard. And so when you're 2 years old and you want that snack in the checkout aisle at the shop and somebody says no and gives you a boundary, you've got to live with that. It's a little thing, but you've got to live with frustrations, failures. And that's also why growing up in a big family like you have of 4 children is very good, because there will be a lot of frustration because somebody will be standing in your way, fighting with you, battling for the attention, and all of that type of thing is very, very healthy for human development. So helicopter parenting and tiger parenting, preferably not.
Interestingly, that idea of free time is something that I haven't really figured my mind on where to be on that, because I think on the one hand, people that had excessive free time that I think about that were my age when I was younger were kids that, when they were around 11, 12, would get into vaping, get into smoking, get into mischief, and, wouldn't really have that same level of wanting to propel themselves forward. But then on the other hand, kids doing too much that were pushed too hard academically, sports-wise, musically, gave up on it and then ended up having to flip the exact same thing. So I definitely think it's a balance. I was definitely a kid that was, kind of thrown into everything. And I think at times almost too much, but that was more for my own regard, not just as a young kid, but all the way up to 18. I played like 4 or 5 different sports. I played 2 instruments as an orchestra, the choir, did all these subjects. And I definitely think I loved the idea of being busy. And even now I have free time, I'm still getting myself to be busy. But something I found when I actually went to university, my parents were actually the ones that told me to free up more of my time. So it was actually my own fault for being busy. And they said, Harvey, if you truly want to succeed in life, you've got to be really, really good at one thing. You can't be a jack of all trades, basically. You can't be good at all these different things, because if you've got someone doing 3 hours a week and you're only doing 2 hours a week, over time, they're going to beat you. And I definitely had that in high school, doing everything. But then going to university and being like, okay, I'm going to pick 1 or 2 things and I'm going to do really well at it. Okay, my academics, I'm going to smash that. My rugby, I'm going to smash that. My podcast, I'm going to smash that. And I definitely say that instead of doing 8 things pretty well and getting 2 units of benefit, adding up to 16 units of benefit, I probably got like 50 units of benefit from the podcast. And so if I was to give my advice to my younger self, I would definitely say work hard, do a lot of things, but also give yourself, as you said, free time to really and truly excel at just one thing.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because I think we need to delineate out different ages. So when I'm talking about being bored, I think it's very important in the formative years, so kind of under 7 years old. So I would say below 7 years old, my message to parents is don't overschedule your child, because they will get way more out of that boredom and that free play time. Having said that, I am actually very aligned with the way that your parents brought you up in terms of your high school life, where actually you don't want kids to have too much of nothing going on, because they'll fill that time with things that usually won't build them up. So my son was a rower. He rowed for South Africa in the end. Now that was hours and hours and hours of every single day. Yeah.
Wow, that's very impressive.
Yeah, but it was high dedication. So when I talk about him having lots of free time, it was more in the formative years, I mean, if I had to sketch out a roadmap for children under 6 years old, lots of boredom time, lots of free time, lots of imaginary play, primary school not over focusing on homework except for two subjects, and that's literacy and language, literacy and maths, because those are foundation subjects. So don't sweat the rest. If they're not doing their homework, don't bother about it. I mean, I never prioritized homework for my kids other than maths and English. And then in high school, giving them something that gives them meaning in a team sport, and that, or in an orchestra, something where you're connecting with other people. So, I think your parents probably did a really good job on that. And certainly, I think other parents could look to emulate that. Free time early on, and then structured time later.
I've got 5 final questions. The first of which I want to ask is around your tech startup. Where did the idea of that come from? What does the app do, and how does it help parents?
So going right back to my very first question, if my passion was around supporting early parents and my skill was around, and my gift was around communicating it, I very early on realized that I could impact the highest number of people if I stepped outside of my private practice. And I have always run a private practice until COVID, I ran a private practice. But I thought if I can step out of my private practice as an OT, I can impact more people. And so that's why I wrote the books. I developed the Baby Sense seminars. But what happened is that more recently, and this is kind of from 2019 onwards, is I realized that it had to be digital because that was the way you were going to access the most people. And so in 2020, I founded my business, which is ParentSense, the ParentSense app. It's a native app. It sits on both app stores, iOS and Android app stores. And it's a parenting digital product that actually supports parents using their baby's data. And that's what differentiates it. And, early on we spoke about how do we know if information is curated? How do parents know if they can trust it? Well, not only is the information in our product trustworthy, but because of the parents' input data about their baby's age, feeding preferences, their milestones, their sleep, and so on, because the parent inputs data, the app then learns and actually gives them back information about what they should be doing with their baby. So every day is different for your baby, different activities. It has an AI element and a chatbot where you can ask it questions like, what activities can I do with my baby tomorrow? It immediately knows how old is your baby, what milestones has your baby done, what does your baby need, and then it builds activities and a routine for your baby. So it's almost like having me next to you all the time to be able to say, okay, I've noticed this about your baby, therefore do that. Because the tech can actually do that. Now, there's no other way to do that. You can't do that through a book. You can't do that through a website. You can't do that on social media. The only way that could be done is with an algorithm built into an app. So we launched the product in 2020. And while parents loved it, we found we didn't have product market fit because parents don't like to pay. None of us like to pay for apps. I mean, you know what it's like. You've probably downloaded a million apps, and as soon as you hit the paywall, you stop using it. So we then realized that what we needed to do was we needed to find somebody else to pay for the app. And that's where our insurance companies have come in. So we have a lot of medical insurers, employee benefit programs, all of that type of, all the businesses who come in, they buy the app for the parents and then the parents use it for free.
Wait, so sorry, why are the insurers paying for the app? Could you explain a little bit? And how did you realize that? That's really smart.
So 2023, we'd been going for 3 years and we hit the wall. Like we literally had no money. We were burning through like £20,000 a month in marketing budget. We were going nowhere. We had revenues of maybe 10,000, but we were burning, like we were going to fall over. And so we realized, hold on, we've got to shift this. And we started to talk to medical insurance companies. They've got 2 agendas. The first agenda is they want to give value back to their customers who are paying for medical insurance, the moms and dads who are paying for maternity benefits. And the other one is that they wanted to do preventative health. They wanted to make sure that those children had a better start in life. And we could offer them both of those because moms love our product. So if a medical insurer or an employee benefit scheme or a baby retailer is giving it to them, they're all going, oh, wow, what an amazing medical insurer, whatever it is. So we have all of the big ones in South Africa, Discovery Health, Momentum Health, Clicks Baby Club. Those are all our clients. They're really big players in South Africa. We're globalizing now. And what they're getting in return is little ones who are developing better, have the right nutrition, sleeping well, and so on.
I know I said I had 4 final questions, but I really just want to ask one last quick one on that. And that is, how do you go about pricing for insurance companies? Because it's one thing to say, £3.99 a month or whatever for a parent, but insurance company, it's sort of like that's it. You're not really expanding from there. I don't need the exact numbers, but how do you even change that model in your head to think about selling to them?
Yeah. It's such a good question, really good question, because we had to do that. So our parents currently, if they go into the App Store, they'll pay £5 a month for the app, and they'll pay, kind of £25 for a year. Problem is when you take that to a medical insurer, they're not going to pay that. And also we found that the pay-per-use model was really terrible. So if we said to a medical insurer, you'll pay for everybody who uses it, they disincentivize to actually push the product, because then they're going to have to pay more. And so that worked very badly. And we tried it with one insurer in 2023. And then in 2024, we pivoted the business again in terms of the pricing model. And they now pay per principal member. So as an example, a medical aid scheme or medical insurer in South Africa might have, let's say, 500,000 members. And some of those are 70-year-old men that will never use our product. And some of them are 15-year-old girls who are not in the age group to use the product either. But they pay across that they pay a very small amount every month. So it's giving our business MRR across the entire, and it's a very, very tiny amount. So they don't even feel it. They're like, okay, so this is a small amount that everybody's insurance levies pay for. But then what happens is we're all incentivized. They're incentivized to push it out as much as possible. And so we report very carefully for our medical aids as well.
That's genius, because that's very much how the insurance model works, right? In that you need to get people to buy, people paying early on and actually paying for the older people who end up having health failings. I have another question. What I wanted to ask is, if you were to do motherhood again, first time getting pregnant and then having a baby, what is one thing that you would do differently?
Wow, that's quite a question. I haven't really given that one much thought. I guess what I would do differently is I would be a little slower. So I tend to work at speed. I speak at speed. I build businesses at speed. My life has been quite fast and very little downtime. Actually, Harvey, a lot like what you articulated earlier on about your own life. I've always had something on the go. I've always got a curious mind. If I'm not working on something, I'll find something else to work on. And maybe motherhood is best done slowly. And certainly with my third child, my first two children, I was writing books. So it was quite different, writing books and doing seminars. With my third child, I had my first business, Baby Sense, which I founded in 2005 when she was born, and then sold in 2014. And so for the first 10 years of her life, I was working pretty intensely and traveling globally. I had distributors in America, UK. So I think I would take it a little bit more slowly. So it almost sounds like a contradiction for what I said earlier about having interests outside of your children. So I do believe working is important, but I think that I could have maybe done it a little bit more cleverly and been maybe more present sometimes.
My third final question, if I was to ask someone in 100 years, how would you want to be described and what would you want your legacy to be?
I would want to know that I have touched the lives of 1 million children over the course of my lifetime. I want to know that because I have lived, somebody's breathed a little easier, their developmental trajectory has been different, their relationship with their child has been different. I think I would want to be that person that had, changed the trajectory of 1 million lives.
You can look at any sort of like scope as you want, but in terms of time. But what's next for you?
So I'm actually busy going through a funding round at the moment, and we're just about to close it. In fact, we in the final throes of due diligence. It'll be done in 2 weeks' time. And from there, we're going to scale our business globally. We've raised sufficient to now scale into different markets. We've tested our product across and our model across South African medical insurers. And we now are looking to employee benefit schemes and medical insurers globally. And that's where we're going to be moving our product.
And my last question, and I ask this to every guest on Personable, is what is one thing that you would want a listener to take away from this episode?
I think the one thing that I would want people to take away is to maintain curiosity. The fact that your audience is listening to this means that they are curious. And I think that it is one of the super skills of every successful person in the world is that they have a question every morning, every day they wake up with. When they listen to somebody, they're making connections between what's going on in their life, somebody else's life, and that person's life. And that curiosity is something that will only make you successful, whether you are parenting a young child and wondering about why they're doing what they're doing, or whether you're running a 8-digit business, globally.
Well, thank you so much, Meg Faure, for coming on Personal today. I would fundamentally agree with the notion that curiosity is the cornerstone of life. I feel like I've learned a tremendous amount from you. And I was actually sort of like going in the podcast in my head because I realized how switched on you were. I was like, oh my God, I got so many questions to ask you. I have all these different routes. What's the best way I can maximize information out of the podcast? And even at the end, we have 55 minutes of the episode in which you're giving me all the insights on parenthood, which I'll probably listen to again in 10 years' time. And then suddenly it's like, and I raised money for my business, my fourth app. We've got Insurers, and then I'm thinking about, okay, well, how do you pay differently for this? And so there's so much value for so many different people. I love that you're an author, you're a serial entrepreneur, a mother, and the amount of insights that you're able to give over such a short period of time, I think is absolutely incredible. So I feel like I've learned a lot. And I think that's a key insight. Like, would you do this podcast even if no one listened? And this is definitely one of those episodes that make me love what I do. So thank you so much for coming on Personable today.
Thank you for having me. I've loved our time together.